the way we'd like to run the day is we're going to talk, we're going to have a conversation, we're going to go in a lot of different places. We both digress a lot, but usually to interesting places. We'll try and stop every half hour or so and take questions from you guys.
So hold them until then. Basically, we'll talk about how we got started and the differences from then and now and how that's changing our practices, and hopefully some of that can be stuff that you guys can fully utilize too.
Now first I just want to ask, just by a show of hands, how many people here are directors? Okay, and how many people here are producers?
Pretty even. And what are the rest of you?
Writers.
Okay. So after that part, we'll then kind of go into how do you get your films made, and what have we learned around that, and we'll try to make sure we include how to make them well in that process too.
So
here we go.
Okay. You want to start or should I?
You start.
Okay. Okay, I started Killer Films about 20 years ago. And at that time, it was really motivated by seeing a film by one of my colleagues from college, Todd Haynes, had made a short film called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story, which if you haven't seen, you can stream it from YouTube illegally because it's banned, which is probably why you haven't seen it. But it's a terrific short film, and I really had an epiphany when I saw it that was exactly the kind of filmmaking I wanted to pursue. It was provocative, it was original, and I felt like I didn't want this director to ever do anything else that didn't have my name on it. So he hasn't so far, thank goodness. But then I made my first feature film with Todd Haynes as a result. We raised the money through a lot of means that aren't really available to American filmmakers anymore, through a limited partnership, through some grants. I just should reiterate, I know probably most of you know this, but it really informs what Ted and I talk about. We have no subsidies in America. You know, we have to figure it out. Using what's available to us, which, as we will keep going back to, enforces a real dialogue with our audience, who our audience is. And that segues into, in some ways, what Poison was able to do in the next few movies I made, which were Swoon and Go Fish, and then I made Kids and I shot Andy Warhol, but those first three movies were considered gay and lesbian in theme. And what that did was it allowed us to really market directly to an audience that was pretty easy to aggregate. I mean, you know, they had the newspapers, film festivals, bars. It was very... Parades, floats. Ted was on the Hedwig float. But that really helped. And it kind of gave us almost immediately this mindset of like, if you could identify your audience and you could figure out where they were, then you could really figure out what the budget of your film should be, and you could be very consistent about how much money you raised, and you didn't even have to cross over. You know, those movies actually that I mentioned did cross over to a certain degree, and that was just icing on the cake. So in some ways, those are the models that we're looking at again now, except that aggregating your audience is very different, obviously. And that's, you know, obviously that's the big task at hand for us. You know, when we started making those movies and taking them to Sundance, which was at almost exactly the same time, in fact, I guess Poison and The Unbelievable Truth were at Sundance the same year, right?
Mm-hmm. No, Trust and
All right, so within a year or two, we really started our careers in exactly the same way. And I came up through, film production, working in various jobs as location manager, production manager, really kind of settling into assistant directing before I decided that I was going to take the leap into producing. But
she had a faster career path. I PA'd for 3 years first.
But ultimately, what started us off was this feeling it was the late 80s in New York. We were starting to see people like Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee making their first movies. And they were making movies that they weren't asking permission. They were saying, Hollywood's not making the kind of stories that I want to see or I want to tell, so I'm going to go out and make my own stories. Honestly, when I grew up, I thought that there was Hollywood narrative filmmaking and there was experimental non-narrative filmmaking. And the idea...
And nothing in between.
Nothing in between. And the idea that you could tell a personal story on your own terms but still use production was very new to me. And when I saw filmmakers actually in practice with it, it was kind of a revelation. And that gave us the inspiration and the courage to say, well, we want to do it ourselves too. And that's really what launched us. And I feel like now the pendulum has swung back and we're in an amazing time where you have the tools and you have the platforms and you really can take matters into your own hand. Over to you.
I mean, it's important to recognize, Christine and I got started at the same time, and we've made exactly the same number of movies. We both have made 68 films, so 136 films between us, except we've made some films together. Okay, so it's probably 130 films between us, which is an awful lot. And you have to start to ask yourself, like, how does that happen? What are the factors that are involved with that? And I think that the key part of it is we arrived when the business had changed and the powers that be, the industry, the status quo, was really slow on the uptake. They didn't want to realize that. They didn't want to change any of their business models to do it. They wanted to continue to get paid. And I still think that that's the most important way to think about, really, when you try to strategize your own movies, what is the film business? The film business is about people keeping their jobs. That's the most important thing to anyone that's employed in the film business. Not getting your movie made, not getting an audience to your film. Everything that they will do will be about making sure that they don't lose their job. So if it's better for them to say, your script sucks, I don't want to make it, or it's too risky, any of that, that's what's going to happen. So that's what you have to work against and design your own strategies to do that. Same thing very much for me when I entered film school. I came from a background of community organizing and really wanted to make films that I believed could change the world. It later got adapted to say also I was willing to do films that changed the film industry, or film art a little bit. And occasionally I'm willing to do a film that might finance my abilities to do either one of those. But it was still that kind of structure that Christine put out there. There was this camp of Hollywood, and there was this camp of pure art. And there was always kind of like a, thumb your nose at exploitation films and the kind of, low level, what people saw as, not high culture, but low culture aspects, be it, just straight to video films or pornography or any of that. And the reality was a lot of my friends and I, that was the only employment we could get, doing films. I got hired after I first quit the business after producing my first film because it was, just run by drug addicts and narcissists, and I felt that was a hard way to work. So I was going to become a drug counselor, and I didn't yet realize that you actually had to have more than just personal experience to be qualified for that. And I got a call to work on a project that was called The Undead Leather Witches from Hell. And the financier was really big on that title, and so big that the fact that they only had 4 weeks to prep it and they'd yet to have a script or any cast or a location, wasn't going to stop them. That was my job. I was supposed to take care of that. And so we found a abandoned insane asylum in New Jersey with the first lobotomy in New Jersey, of many to come later, and probably more than they needed, took place. And I cast 4 of my friends and 4 legitimate actors and put one friend in a monster mask, and we ran around the asylum, shot a movie in 10 days. I had already had the good fortune to run into Hal Hartley, a director I've made I think 9 films with, and was trying to get his movies made. And I tell him about this, method that these folks were using to make films. And his cousin was also working for another company that had a contract to just deliver a set number of videos each year, and feature-length videos. And they had a different plan. They would hire a B-movie actor like Lance Henriksen or somebody like that, and have him come to set 3 days. But one day he'd be dressed as a paramilitary officer. The next day he'd be wearing kind of futuristic sci-fi wear, and the other day would be some sort of period thing. And they would shoot footage. At night shots would be lit by car headlights, and it was all short ends. And they would then give the footage to film school editors and just say, try to make this work and tell us what scenes are missing. It's a good experiment. And then they'd write those scenes and hire another B movie to kind of connect that. And we told that to Hal, and he kind of took the message that we couldn't. We told it like these were just funny stories you tell over a 6-pack of beer. And but one day he got fed up with my inabilities to actually produce his movies, and he told me he wanted to take me to look at his hometown. And I was like, oh, that's sweet, Hal. Okay, I'll go to Grand Central Station. We'll go out on the train. And on the train he gave me a script. And I said, when did you write this? He said, oh, I wrote it in the last 2 weeks. I said, well, great. I'll break it down. I'll budget it. I'll schedule it. I'll submit it. We'll try to get it financed. And he was like, no. This one we're making it. We're making it in 4 weeks because you told me that's all you need to prep a film. and I was like, what are you talking about? He said, well, you know how the Citibank is giving out those loans for these things they call home computers, $15,000 a pop? I've got 3 computers, now, but I didn't get them. I got the loans, and we're making our movie. And we made The Unbelievable Truth, shot it on about a 2-to-1 ratio on 35 short ends. It cost us $55,000 to put it in the can, and when we took it to the Toronto Film Festival and sold it to this really fat guy who said he had a distribution company. It turned out to be Harvey Weinstein. He bought it for $250,000. We distributed the profits amongst the cast and crew. Everyone got paid at least a full union wage, though there was no contracts to pay anybody. And we produced a lot of goodwill, obviously, with that. If you go on to IMDb and you look at The Unbelievable Truth, you'll see that about 20 people went on to direct feature films from that. Nobody in that cast and crew came from any privilege or deep pockets. Some of the folks that didn't go on to direct their own movies have won Academy Awards for makeup, to produce movies like Babel and Revolutionary Road. People got on to have real careers because they saw that you could do something really by working together, by collaborating in that sense. And when we did the next movie, we didn't have any cash flow until a week before we started shooting, but we had all that goodwill, and we were able to get that next movie in the can in less than a year. The thing that started along that same period for both Christine and myself was, we were completely ignorant. So when we went out to the film festival and somebody said, I have a small distribution operation in Belgium and I would like to buy your film, we were like, yeah, let's do it. And we started to find those, that literally at that point in time, it was one person, one company in every territory that was interested in these type of films.
But I should add, when we took Poison to the Berlin Film Festival, the story that we tell now, because I was with James Seamus, who was the executive producer, who then became Ted's partner. The story we tell now is that we took it to Berlin to sell ourselves. The real story is no sales agent wanted it. And we had no choice. They were all like, this isn't sellable. What the hell is this? This is some weird prison, Genet, bizarre, fractured narrative. Who the hell is Todd Haynes? But what that did for us was we did go to Berlin. We figured out very quickly who the territorial distributors were in each territory that could potentially buy the movie. We negotiated the contracts. Some of them really not to our advantage because we were that green. But the bottom line is we got to know the end users of our product very quickly. And those are relationships, frankly, that we still have today. I mean, those distributors, for the most part, I would say about 75% of them are still in business in some way or another, and they're still the ones who buy our films. Now, obviously, we work with sales agents, but that direct contact, it was absolutely essential in keeping our careers to be as long as they are.
And, it may have been this Poison, may have been this very bold and unique film, but that's exactly what its attribute was. It was incredibly distinct in the marketplace. It could have only been made by one person. It was establishing that filmmaker's brand as it was. And it was in a space that nobody had yet entered. It was, lessons that I took to heart from sitting on the sidelines. I did not yet know Christine, but I witnessed what was going on there. And, so a few years later, James and I made a film that was the first feature cut on an Avid. For those of you who have worked on Avids, we cut it on AVR 3. That they stopped using that resolution metrics at 97. So not the year 97, but AVR 97. So when you talk about pixels, we were talking about things that were about this big on the screen. And when you watch the film to this day, you'll see, at least 8 out of focus shots, because it went right out of the lab to the print and got shipped on the plane to the Berlin Film Festival. And I'd known a few sales agents, so I snuck the print to them, and they looked at it, and they said, "You made this movie, but it's 70% in Chinese, it's gay, and it feels like a movie from the 1940s."
Except for the gay and Chinese part.
Exactly. It was the wedding banquet. It went on to win the grand prize at Berlin that year. But at that point, James and I had $2,000 in our bank account. And we just had this film verified as absolutely worthless by the international sales company that we knew. That were the people that specialized in selling this type of film. They weren't the wrong people. They were the people that had already, started, serving American independence. And we made the decision to go ahead and take the last money, to not pay our assistants. That they approved it, mind you, not pay them next month, and go off to Berlin. And James and I were able to do $3 million in sales out of our backpacks in hotel room floors, bars, making lots of mistakes along the way. But
probably less, though, after Poison.
Thankfully.
Yes.
And asking for what people said you couldn't ask for. Sales agents were saying, "Oh, you'll have to at least do a 15 or 20-year license at that point." And we were saying, "No, we want to license the film for 7 years or for 12 years. And all that paid off, tremendously, due to our, ignorance and our boldness and not having to yet manage that relationship into the long term. Sales agents' jobs are to sell all of their films, not just your film, but all of their films. So, what that means is they have to make sure that they have a good relationship for the next film. So they're not going to say, "I'm going to get a shorter license term for you," because they have a standard way of doing things. But we were able to do, much better business by not knowing those rules and asking for things that people still will give. And I find that still to this day. I made a movie called Super, which we finally just got UK distribution on, that opened in the States 2 weeks ago. And I was involved in closing the deal, and I'm sitting there with WME and UTA and lawyers and all that, and IFC who paid $1 million for the film, for a movie that I had said, I didn't expect to get anything out of North America for, so that was a nice profit. But in that negotiation, it was the same thing. I said, "Let's review the terms," and they were like, "License period, 20 years plus 5. And I was like, stop. And the agents look at me with those eyes like, "Ted, don't fuck up this deal." And it's like, "It's got to be 12 years, guys. You're just not paying enough for it." And they were like, "Okay." Let's move on. It's like they're not going to ask you always. You have to remember in all of the business things, the bigger picture. And you'll hear this a lot today. Put yourself in their shoes. Whether it's the people in the film business who are protecting their jobs, the people who are selling all the films. What is their ultimate agenda, and how do they approach it? And what do you need to do to help them to make your work move forward? And what can you do differently to protect your work? But that was a key lesson to me. I made a film that they said was worthless, and I made more money on that film than I ever dreamed of. It kept my company open for 2 years, just on the sales fees that we took at a much lower rate. It gave me an investor who came back for movies time and time again. And it created something that a mentor to both Christine and I told me was like the key ingredient. That was Scott Meek, who used to run Zenith here in the UK and works out in Australia now. And he said, now you have it. You have that thing that's so necessary. I was like, what is it? Fear. Everyone will fear that your next movie is better than the one that you just made. You're at that level. So you just have to keep making movies as fast as you can to keep that fear factor going. And that second half of that really became, I think, something that we took to heart, which is it's so important not just to ask that question of how do I get my movie made, but how do you keep making movies? The secret ingredient in what we do is try to design our lives so that we can remain prolific. We're budget agnostic. We both continue to work at any sort of budget level. We're platform agnostic. We continue to push things, to any sort of place where people can find and discover our films.
But I think the other thing to add to that now is we're also, format agnostic. I mean, now we're really branching out into all different lengths, all different, we just are premiering in the States right now, and I actually don't know when it's premiering here, but Todd Haynes' long-form miniseries for HBO, Mildred Pierce with Kate Winslet. But
I'll be selling DVDs at lunch.
Now that would have been a good business plan. And that was, a few years ago, if I had told a room full of people like you that Todd Haynes' next project is going to be for television, you probably would have said, why? And the idea that Kate Winslet was going to go straight off her Oscar into Mildred as her next thing would have been astonishing a few years ago. But now, directors are really moving, in an effort to keep working as the film business gets more and more risk averse. We're trying to find different ways and different platforms and different formats that we can so that we can keep telling our stories. Mildred's a great example because people keep saying to me who haven't seen it, oh, so did you make it for TV because you couldn't make it as a feature? And it was like, yeah, we couldn't make a 5.5 hour feature. You're right. Although most directors think why not? But Todd specifically chose television because he wanted to tell a story that way. He saw it as an opportunity. This is great. This is a way I can tell a story that I haven't before. And we're working on a movie right now that we're making for Vugaru, which is Michael Eisner's online content production company. It's run by Kristen Jones, who used to, I know it started, we might need a shift.
I was going to write it on the board. But.
Oh, okay. It's run by Kristen Jones, who used to work at BVI and then at Miramax, and I say that, I give you her pedigree simply because it's run by people who come from film.
But she's a Brit.
She's actually not.
She has a British accent.
Oh, well, I think it's just from living here, but she's... Anyway.
It carries weight in Hollywood.
You know what? This is going to go on the website, and she's going to get mad at you.
I don't have an ear. I can't tell those things.
Anyway, what their business plan is they're doing feature-length films, 90 minutes. The budgets are in the $500,000 to $600,000 range. They take all rights. The deals are pretty good. They're not, they're not like the best, but we've certainly been handed and expected to sign off on a lot worse. And you get to co-own your movie. The one thing is it has to premiere online. They don't have their own portal, so they sell to the portal that's right for the project, which is good because it means it's not genre-based and it's not cast-dependent. So in some ways, it's a fantastic way to get a first feature or a risky feature off the ground because there's a lot of play there. They say they'll sell to Hulu, to Alloy, to whatever seems right. The resistance is coming from the filmmakers, and that's something that we're really working with. I mean, really and grappling with, because filmmakers are still seeing the web, whether it's actual production for the web or whether it's actual distribution on the web, as a failure, as second best, as it didn't quite make it. The same way I think that they looked at TV a few years ago, and now we were remarking the other day, it's astonishing how many A-list directors are directing their first television pilots or their first television shows. I mean, obviously Scorsese in Boardwalk Empire, but Jonathan Demme is doing one, David Fincher is doing one. It's no longer, a ghetto where you go, if you're in director jail. Anyway, the Voogaroo deal is very interesting. Also, one last thing about it, and you guys, should look it up. You make your 90-minute feature, and what they do is they take that and they cut it into 5 to 10-minute pieces, and that's how they put it out there. That's how you download or stream it, in these bites. They ask the filmmakers not to do that themselves because they're afraid that you'll simply become too episodic. But it's all about, I believe, figuring out what our consumption level tolerance is for content on the web. And it's an interesting point, because I feel like one of the things we have to address as filmmakers is how are these platforms, the way we're making movies, the way we're getting them out there, changing the stories that we tell and how we tell them. This Voogaroo experience is going to be an experiment for me too, to see how that actually affects all of those things and how we use the tools of the web in service of the film.
So there's been a couple of points that we've hit on here. Just to reiterate, don't ask for permission. Recognize the change that has occurred. Try to establish a practice of prolific work, and also within there, I think it is, define your brand, along the way, whether it was in the beginning with Christine's focus on the new queer wave. Christine still, I noticed when we walked in, some woman gave Christine the once over for your raincoat, which as we walked down in Soho Square today, someone said, "Look, it's Superwoman" last night. And James Seamus, who worked with both Christine and I in the beginning, was always known as, he's that guy with the bow tie and glasses.
And you don't know how hard Ted has worked on this voice. But it's like every morning he does the vocal exercises.
But it's true, you don't even have to see my face to know that I'm around the corner. But it also obviously extends to your work in a big way, and the need, to try to understand how people see what it is that you create, how do they react to it, what they come to expect in alignment to the other work that you've made. And that used to be, I think, almost as much of a trap as it was a benefit. But in these kind of changing times where you're trying to, maintain a prolific career, and if you've embraced the same sort of platform, form, budget agnostic practices that we have, you actually have such a more tremendous freedom than you ever have before, because in trying to address that and trying to figure out that bigger question of how the hell am I going to earn a living, how can I have a sustainable career at doing the things that I love, that I'm passionate about, you start to see that in today's time, it really does move away from that one film at a time, get my film made, then I'll address the next one and so on. And it
Market
moves,
it for 2 years, do the festival schlep, all of that.
and it starts to change from this business of one-offness, of a single product that you sell to a new audience every time, to one that's much more of a ongoing conversation. How do you engage with an audience to such an extent that as much as you give, they're giving back too, that it moves from an audience to a community, and that's really a page that I feel that we've taken from the lessons of Rome burning, the music industry collapse, and seeing what artists, at least in the U.S., have done. That there are more artists earning money now in the U.S. than there have been ever before. There's not more
musical artists.
Yeah, there's not more artists. Probably actually more artists in general too.
That could be.
Not necessarily earning more money. It's just like Sundance. This year Sundance was the most successful market in its history, not in terms of money, but in terms of deals. There were 40 films licensed at the festival, which is 1/3 of the films essentially at the festival, which is really huge.
And they were licensed for money that made sense, because often, what we all remember of Sundance is that that crazy bidding war where some movie goes for $10 million and that's the business of the festival and that's it. And then almost inevitably that movie comes out a few months later and everyone goes, ha ha, festival fever. But this year, it made sense. Movies were sold at a decent profit, but nothing crazy.
I have a website that I helped co-found called Hammer to Nail, which is a website that reviews under $1 million American narratives. So you can replicate it here in the exact same way. And it's only filmmakers reviewing films, and we only run the positive reviews because there's enough haters out there. It's really just to help you find what you want to watch if you happen to like this type of movie. And one of the editor of it is a man named Michael Tully, who had a micro-budget film at Sundance this year that played in the midnight section called Satan. And it did very well. It sold for a very high return on investment. But really, what's it come down to? It gives them enough money to live a year and to make another movie. It's not, it's a salary. It's not a gold mine. And that's kind of deals that were going on a lot this year at Sundance. But
sorry, go ahead.
I was trying to get back on my topics. Somehow I got off of it. It was the ongoing conversation, and because of the web and all of these different ways to reach audiences, it starts to free you up in terms of the form that you choose to have your work be. That I think it's really important that as creative people, you are on as many platforms and in many ways, and you're helping your community understand who you are. And I really believe no one is just a genre filmmaker or a writer of romantic comedies or political documentaries, that the nature of being alive is really quite expansive. And we don't like it when we're an audience member, to say we're at 18 to 35 demographic and we only like this. My Netflix queue, which is supposed to be the best recommendation engine out there. Netflix, everyone's familiar with, even though you don't have it here, right? It's love, akin to love cinema, right? That's what's love film. But they have a very good recommendation engine. But they think I'm somewhere between a 6 to 15-year-old boy, a gay male, with a family that likes political documentaries, that seems to like really bloody movies and cerebral foreign films. Somehow that's my recommendation. We found the perfect movie for you. It's about a 6-year-old. So it's very confusing. That's the best that it gets. But that's the fact is, I actually am also pretty content agnostic. I really do love movies. I love, non-perfect movies, noble failures. I gain a lot from watching mistakes that other people make. There's a movie that doesn't work. Oh, what is it? Quick, I want to watch it. But the fact is, in our work, I think we're that same way. And the better that you can communicate who you are, the better audiences are going to start to find you. And it used to be that trap that once you made a movie that was successful, they wanted you to keep making those funny movies that you made in your youth. How come you're doing these serious ones now? But now that you can actually deviate from a standard feature-length, feature-dominant form, and be it whether through text or through short films or tone poems or however you want to think of them, film haikus, you can really expand the definition of what you are, so your brand doesn't have to be relegated to simply a bow tie and overly cerebral films. You can embrace a much wider extent, and that's what's important about that is, I can tell you I've been trapped in the content that I make several times over. I started in horror films and I couldn't get anyone to take me seriously to work on a quality movie. I made quality films and I couldn't get anyone to let me do genre films. It took me a long time to be able to make comedy movies, and only now am I getting to get back into things of a more genre nature. I think I'll make those my whole life. All of this wide variety. But people said, "Oh, Ted, this is what you do." It's like, no, it's not what I do, but it's all that you've seen. So don't trap me. And now I feel I have a much greater ability to reach out to those different audiences and bridge them together.
All right, so I think now we should take some questions, and then we'll start getting into how do you get your film made.
I still want to talk a little bit about the change.
Okay, all right.
Do that first.
All right, but any questions? Yeah.
Finding collaborators. I'm a director and I'm having real problems finding a good match in terms of a producer.
So finding a producer.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's it's unfortunately a question like, how do I find my soulmate? It's a hard thing. As a producer, frankly, I used to be quite jealous of other producers, particularly the ones that my directors wanted to work with, And, I feel along the way that it's that same sort of thing. There are times that I'm the right person for this specific project, and there's times that I'm not. And I want them to always find that perfect match. So it's good if they go out and work with Christine, because then they'll see what I contribute to it in a different sort of way. We're not the same. They're not interchangeable. But I think that the big part of it, which would be one of, if I was trying to build the blog post from this talk, I got up to 4 key points. The other one, I think, would be a willingness to fail. That both in finding your collaborators and in the work that you do. I see 2 distinct types of movies generally. Those that are proofs, that are trying to show everything that you know, and they're overly engineered for my taste, and those that are experiments, that are trying to learn through the process. And as much as that's true in content, I try to do that in the process that I'm in. I'm not always the correct fit. Super, the movie that I just made, which is the story of an average guy who loses his wife, and to win her back is kind of led into trying to become a superhero, even though he's not particularly strong, has no superpowers, isn't even particularly bright, and perhaps is lacking a basic moral code to live by. It was a movie I very much wanted to do to kind of change how people were also perceiving my work. And when I reached out to James Gunn, the writer-director, and Rainn Wilson, the star, their first reaction was, "Why do we need you? We're going to get this movie made. What do you bring to the project?" And I had to be able to articulate, that not only would my involvement bring a higher caliber of actor, to the piece, that would also bring a better. Actually, I was saying, instead of making it the movie originally was going to be made at 25. They wanted to make it around 5 or 6, and my pitch then was, when you make it with me, we can do it for about 2 1/4. You get less money by doing it with me, and that's a benefit because you'll be able to really go to the extremes that you want to in this film. That this material really needs to be pushed, and I'm going to be on you all the time to push it. I don't have quite the same zeal for certain aspects of cinema that James does, that I think he likes in collaborators. I have a different tact into it, and I have to keep going back to him and saying, we need the emotional truth of the scene to really work. And he's like, but I want it to be funny. And it's like, no, you got to have the heart that's in there to make it work. And he saw it, and it worked. I think that in finding a collaborator, you have to be always in that kind of detective mode. I keep lists for everything, like people like, oh, this person I like for this, and maybe at that time I'm going to collaborate. Everything is a long-term process. My financier on Super was a 7-year relationship. My financier on Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, which won Best Director at Sundance this year, was a 5-year relationship. Before they ever gave me any money, I was working on them for 7 to 5 years. I invested a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of people trying to find that right combination of when it's there. Don't lose heart that it's taking, the years that it's taken to find that perfect producer. I went the wrong direction in one marriage, trying to find love, but eventually I found the person that was really right for me. Yes, there was a battle zone, in getting there, but it was certainly worth it, and it's just, nor do I blame myself for the mistakes that I made in that relationship. It made me a better, partner in my relationship, just as the mistakes that I've made in my producing career have made me a better producer. Sometimes you just have to get started.
All right, and a slightly more pragmatic response. It's one of the things that I find is very daunting for new producers these days is, we're expected to do a heck of a lot more than we did when we first started out. When Ted and I first started, we often just went on to movies that were already financed, and we were just supposed to, make them as good as they could possibly be. Now you're supposed to do that, find the money, keep the money happy, attach the talent, keep the talent happy, and it's often the job. I work with a lot of partners because it's often just too much for me. And in the midst of all of that, make sure that the director feels that you're really there for him or her and that you're really protecting their vision. So what I think that's kind of done, frankly, is that there's a scarcity of producers. And there's just not quite, we both like to mentor producers when we can. We both work as EPs on films where there's a producing directing team in place, but we help smooth out some of the stuff like attaching cast or going for financing, and help along the way, hopefully, to empower that young producer who doesn't have a whole lot of experience. They don't have to be young, simply haven't made a whole lot of movies. And that's something we're really actively trying to build. But it really does come back down to community again. One of the things, the team that Ted worked with on the Mary Martha movie.
Just say,
it was a 3-person team that had all gotten together in film school, and they were producing and directing for each other, and they had a system where one was going to make a movie this year, and the other 2 were going to produce it. The next was going to make the one the next year. There was another team at Sundance too, like that had 2 films. Another Earth, that was directed by Mike Cahill, and The Sound of My Voice, which was directed by somebody whose name I'm not going to butcher, but his first name was Zal. And they had in common, the same woman had written and produced both films and starred in them. So we're seeing more and more of these teams, and I think that's actually that's really going to be the wave of the future, where people just wear a lot of different hats, because the work has become so big, but also there's so many different pieces to address.
And what you see in that is kind of starts to solve in these collaboration teams the question of how do I remain prolific?
Right.
That they really work it out. This time you're staying home and writing, so we have the next project and we're going out and doing this, and they kind of do that kind of round robin. And the other thing that's in what Christine said is you're never going to find the person that's all things, for your needs. So both as a director, you're looking for producers almost in collaborating teams, because beyond the job responsibilities that Christine laid out there, it's also now you as filmmakers' responsibility to build your community, to produce your distribution, to manage your assets for the long term. And that's a hell of a lot of work, and you're not going to be financially rewarded at this point in time well enough to justify it. But it's really, I think, the right strategy to adopt. So you have to say, okay, some things there'll be mistakes, and I'm not going to take it out because I'm going to be focused on the relationship more than the detail of the deal. I'm going to find a wide range of collaborators, and I'm going to find the people, like the core person you want isn't the one with the experience. When someone says to me, Ted, I want you to produce my $750,000 movie, I might think that they're going to go off and win the Best Director prize at Sundance. Like this one, I'll benefit from that relationship and be really proud of the movie, but I can't afford to be involved with that. What you need is that person, despite their level of experience, who is dedicated to your movie, and the person ideally who totally understands the film that you want to make. That can be that second check. So that they may never have produced a movie before, but they'll be there to work through those questions. Producing is helping somebody, realize the all of the options that they have and the repercussions of those choices, and one mind can't do it. So you need a lot of people to kind of be thinking. You, the director, have to be open to filter through which ones are the right ideas for this movie and which ones not. But it's not experience. It's that kind of simpatico attitude.
Okay, a couple more.
Hi, my name is Tyrell and I'm the director. The question I need to ask is, at the moment you spoke about putting something online, like putting film online. I'm working on a documentary at the moment about books.
Right.
Basically, I'm speaking to a lot of different people, random people on the street, and other people that give an interview. The question is, if I'm putting it online, do I need to get release forms from all these people? Because obviously I'm sort of speaking to like hundreds of different people about their love of books and the type of books they like, etc. So can you maybe give me some insight?
I think that's really legal advice, and I'm not sure that's...
Well, Christine's right. We're not lawyers, and you can't follow, But
So if you take it with a grain of salt, okay?
The first question I have is really, what are you planning to do with the documentary? Are you planning to use it primarily as something to monetize, and to sell? And countries have different laws about that, where something is fair use, where there's implied consent, and what needs to be actually memorialized, on a piece of paper. When you're not looking to monetize it and you're using it for some other purposes, different territories have different rules of how you can use somebody's image, and different sites have different rules on
That's
that same
right.
thing. That there are certainly some things that people do these days that aren't legal but are permitted, within the communities that the work serves.
It's a project of love. It's not to monetize it. So I just wondered if I really
In a technical sense, you probably have to get all rights for everything, and your work will never be seen because of that. And you have to ask, what risk? At the end of the day, if you're not, making money on it, most laws are still primarily monetarily based, and they're not going to be able to do much more than say remove it. I've been working with some filmmakers now who kind of incorporate the idea of the digital fuzz in somebody's face as an aesthetic, choice in their work to address some of these reasons. One more. That's why you should always sit up front. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Richard and I'm not an alcoholic. Sorry, bad joke. My quick question was, I was in LA a month ago taking a few meetings, and the one thing noticed with my one thing I noticed with my friends who were staying out there is they're all ditching their cable packages and going straight for online streaming services like Netflix. So with the event of that kind of thing and its increasing popularity around the globe, how are you finding that's changing existing distribution?
Well, again, okay, so I think we got up to like 6 key points. I would say the 7th key point is that change, is constant, both in business and in art, and it's a good thing to embrace. So whatever the model is today is changing. Netflix in particular, like I have a unfinished blog post. People often ask, I have a blog called Hope for Film that's now on IndieWire. hopeforfilm.com is where you can find the archive of stuff. But people say, Ted, how do you write so many blog posts? I have like 150 unfinished blog posts that I, just have. And I was amazed, like in the course of like a 2-month period, what I could ascertain as the Netflix business model was changing every week. It's like, oh, we have to have premium content. No, we don't. We have to have breadth of content. We're only features. No, we're not. We're television shows. We're maintaining DVDs. No, we're not. Like, it was just shifting. Now, I know it can't be that chaotic there, but whatever they're doing, the stock price is certainly doing well. But in trying to figure that out from a filmmaker standpoint, I think that there are things that you start to see. First of all, most independent filmmakers previously of truly specialized niche content could feel comfortable that they could probably move like 10,000 DVDs because, stores and places all wanted to have one of them. Netflix buys 5. So that completely changes your own sort of revenue. Do you want it on that platform? And if so, what is the proper model to get it? Because right now you're not going to get it, but you will have access to it. I certainly am open to a much wider variety of content now that I don't have to pay to legally stream things. So I see more things, and it changes my taste.
But I think it's also, the other part of that question is, again, how does it affect the stories we make and the way we tell them? And, another example I want to use, is what Hulu is doing right now. Now, Hulu is...
Not available here.
I'm aware. I was about to explain what it was. Hulu is an online portal that started... When did they start? Like 2 years ago? I don't know.
Crowdsource the answer.
Probably a couple years ago, and they started out primarily as a place that the networks got together as a place for you to catch up on the TV shows. The networks are the studios. To catch up on the TV shows that you missed. So that you weren't, so that there was a place where they could, aggregate them so that you wouldn't be illegally downloading them, and they could still, run advertising. So, and it was really aimed at people who were used to watching television, like people in their 30s as opposed to teenage boys, meaning, not people who would go to YouTube and watch kittens falling into, goldfish bowls, but people who wanted to watch TV and were making kind of that movement towards the web as a place where they could still get what they were used to. What Hulu's decided to do is start making original programming. And that's very interesting to me because what it signifies is that they're trying to do what HBO did, say 10 years ago, when HBO decided that rather than just being the place where you caught up on movies, because that's really what it was. It was home box office, and if you had HBO or a friend had HBO, you'd be like, oh, there's Rocky 2 that I didn't bother to see in the cinema. And that was really its function. When they decided to start doing original programming so that they could branch off from that, their only real mandate at that time was to do stuff that was highly original and different from the networks. One of the things when you work with HBO is they're like, make it more violent, put more sex in it, more R-rated. But they were trying to distinguish themselves as a true alternative. And one of the things they did was encourage filmmakers, artists, true talents, come here, you're not going to get a ton of money, but we're going to give you a tremendous amount of freedom, and you can go to the edge. Like, you can do something like Sopranos or The Wire. You can do something that's really, really out there. And Hulu is basically trying to do the same thing now online. What's interesting to me, and I'm not sure if this is going to stick, is they really correct you when you sit down and you have a meeting with them and you say, I have this great idea for, a bunch of webisodes and they go, television. Like, that's their thing. It's television but you're watching it on your computer, so what? It's still television. And they want to do it in, the same sort of sitcom length format of, 22, 23 minutes. But they're funding original series. You can co-own them. They're funding them, for peanuts. But, the idea is that, they will greenlight an entire series off a pilot script of 6 to 10, 12 episodes, whatever you want to do. And I think the work that's going to come out of there is going to really be interesting and a real arbiter of the future. And a lot of the filmmakers who are going there, even though it is chump change, and they're filmmakers who could probably go to networks or pay cable and get more money to make their original ideas, are going to Hulu because they're seeing a lot of play there, a lot more freedom, and I think it's going to be pretty fascinating.
And you walk away owning your content after a short time.
That's right.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to try to distill a bit from what Christine just said into precisely what the change has been, over the last 3 years in terms of industry and how that affects your own work practices.